The first black SUV rolled into the dusty compound like it owned the entire street. Then came a second. Then a third. Grace froze inside her tiny one-room apartment. Her hand still gripped the thin curtain she used as a door. The room smelled of pepper and smoke from the jollof rice she had just finished eating. Her black and white waitress uniform clung to her tired body. Outside, her neighbors began to shout. "Who is that? Did someone die?" Grace's heart pounded. She wasn't expecting anyone. Nobody visited her in this place. The SUV stopped. Dust rose and fell like brown powder. Then the door of the front SUV opened. A man stepped out. He looked too clean for the compound, too expensive. He wore a bright white kaftan that looked freshly ironed. A red cap sat on his head. He didn't smile. 2 security guards stepped out behind him. Both were tall with serious faces. They scanned the compound like they were searching for trouble. Grace's neighbors backed away. Grace swallowed hard. Her fingers trembled as she stepped outside. The man's eyes locked onto her immediately. He took 2 slow steps forward. The guards followed. "Excuse me," he said in a steady voice. Grace nodded quickly, her eyes wide. He stared at her like he was checking if she was real. Then he asked, "Are you Grace?" Grace's heart skipped. How did he know her name? "Yes, I'm Grace," she whispered. The man released a slow breath. "My name is David," he said. "And the old man you've been taking food to every day? His name is Joseph. He is my father." Grace's whole body went stiff. Her mind spun in confusion. That homeless old man she fed every day was someone's father? A rich man's father? It didn't make sense. David's voice softened. "We have been looking for him everywhere." Grace held her breath. David stepped closer. "I went to where he stays. I found him there. When I spoke to him, he described your place. He told me about you." Grace felt like the ground was moving under her feet. Her neighbors were watching and whispering. Some were pointing at her. "Thank you," David said firmly. "Thank you for taking care of him." Grace didn't know what to say. She only knew one thing. Joseph was not a bad man. He was just lost. David continued speaking. "My father suffers from memory loss. It happens once every year. When it comes, he forgets everything. His name, his home, even me." Grace's lips parted in shock. David's eyes looked tired, like he had cried many times in private. "We have not found a cure. When it happens, he ends up somewhere. He begs. He sleeps on the ground. And he doesn't remember who he used to be." Grace felt something tight wrap around her heart. She remembered Joseph's teary eyes, his shaking hands, the way he always said, "God bless you." David looked around the dusty compound. Then he looked back at Grace. "Despite your own struggles, you still decided to help him." Grace's face tightened. She remembered her room, the thin mattress on the floor, the empty corner where furniture should be. David shook his head. "You've been buying him jollof rice and chicken every day with your daily pay. People like you are rare." Grace's eyes stung with tears. "Where do you work, Grace?" David asked. Grace hesitated. "I work at a restaurant. Blue Palm Restaurant in Abuja." David's expression changed. "That restaurant is owned by me." Grace's knees almost gave way. What was David about to say next? Grace stared at David in complete shock. Her mouth opened but no words came out. "From today, Grace," David said clearly, "you are the new manager of Blue Palm Restaurant." The compound went silent. Not normal silent. This was the kind of silence that made even breathing sound loud. Grace's neighbors froze like statues. Somebody dropped a plastic bowl and it cracked on the ground. "Manager?" Grace whispered. Her brain refused to understand the words. David nodded. "Manager." Grace's eyes filled with tears. Not happy tears yet. Confused and scared tears. "Sir, I don't understand," she said. "I'm just a waitress." David's voice became firm. "You are a good person. And good people deserve help too." Grace shook her head fast. Fear rose in her chest. "But my boss, Susan. She won't allow it. She hates me." David's eyes narrowed. "Susan?" Grace nodded, almost pleading. "She treats me like I'm nothing. She insults me in front of customers." David's face hardened. "You don't need permission from Susan. Blue Palm is my restaurant." Grace's hands began to shake. This felt too big, too sudden, like a dream that could become a nightmare. David turned and opened the back door of the SUV. "Enter the car," he said. Grace blinked. "Enter?" "Yes," David said. "Come and meet my father." Grace looked back at her room. At the curtained door, the cracked wall, the thin mattress inside. Then she looked at the convoy, at the guards, at David's calm face. She felt like she was standing between two worlds. One world she knew, pain, struggle, being ignored. Another world she had only imagined, money, power, safety. Grace took one slow step forward. Then another. She climbed into the SUV, careful like she might dirty the seats. The guards closed the door. The car began to move. As they drove out of the compound, Grace looked through the window. She saw the uncompleted building by the road. Joseph was still there. Sitting on the dusty ground, holding the takeaway container she had given him. He was eating slowly like it was the best food in the world. Grace's chest tightened. David noticed her stare. "We will pick him up now," he said. Grace nodded. "Please don't scare him." David's face softened. "I won't." The convoy stopped by the road. David stepped out first. The guards followed. Grace slowly stepped out too. Joseph looked up. His eyes widened in fear. He clutched the food container to his chest like someone was about to steal it. He tried to stand but his old knees failed him. David walked toward him carefully. "Joseph," David called softly. Joseph stared like he didn't know the name. David crouched down in front of him. "My father," David said, his voice shaking. "It's me." "David." Joseph blinked. His eyes moved from David's face to the red cap to the guards. Then back to David. His lips trembled. Then he suddenly shouted, "Leave me alone." Grace gasped. Joseph tried to crawl backward on the dusty ground. Panic spread across his face. He looked like a trapped animal. Grace's heart broke into pieces. Would Joseph recognize his own son, or had his memory stolen everything from him again? Grace stepped forward quickly. "Joseph," she called softly. Joseph's eyes snapped to her. For a second, the fear in his face dropped. He recognized her voice. He clung to that recognition like it was a rope in deep water. "Grace," he whispered, confused. Grace nodded fast, crouching beside him. "Yes, it's me. You're safe." Joseph's hand shook. "Why are they here?" Grace looked at David, her eyes begging him to be gentle. David took a slow breath. "We are taking you home, sir." Joseph stared blankly like the word home meant nothing to him. Then Joseph's face twisted in pain. He pressed his palm to his head and groaned like something inside his brain was fighting. Grace leaned closer. "Joseph, are you okay?" Joseph's breathing became rough. His eyes rolled like he was trying to remember something that kept running away. Then his mouth opened. A single name fell out. "David." David froze. His eyes filled instantly. "Yes," David whispered. "Yes, sir, it's me." Joseph blinked. His eyes widened. Suddenly he began to cry. Deep, heavy tears that made his shoulders shake. He looked at his dirty hands like he couldn't believe they belonged to him. Then he looked at Grace, still crying. "Why?" Joseph asked in a broken voice. "Why did I sleep on the ground?" Grace's throat tightened. David reached forward slowly, his hands shaking. He tried to hold his father. But Joseph pulled back suddenly, panic returning. "No!" Joseph cried. "Don't touch me." Joseph's eyes darted around wildly. His breathing grew faster. His face showed fear again, like his memory was coming and going at the same time. Grace held her breath. In that moment she realized something terrifying. Joseph was not fully back. And if he slipped away again, David might lose him right there on that dusty ground. Joseph's body shook harder. Then he grabbed Grace's wrist tightly. "Grace, please don't let them take me," he whispered with raw fear. Grace's eyes widened as David stood up quickly. His face turned sharp. Grace suddenly understood. This wasn't just a rescue. This could turn into a struggle because Joseph might fight them. David stepped forward. "Sir, I'm taking you home." Joseph's eyes filled with terror. He opened his mouth to scream. But Grace reacted fast. She tightened her grip on his wrist and leaned close. Her voice was low and calm, the way she always spoke to him when he was afraid. "Joseph," she said gently. "It's okay. Nobody will hurt you. Please trust me." Her eyes locked into his. Joseph's shaking slowed a little. His chest still rose and fell too fast, but the scream never came out. David watched them closely. For the first time since he arrived, his confidence cracked. What he saw wasn't business or money. It was an old man clinging to the only person who had shown him kindness while he was lost. David raised his hand to the guards. "Step back," he ordered quietly. The guards obeyed immediately. David crouched again, lowering himself to Joseph's level. "Sir," he said softly, "nobody is forcing you. We are only going home. Grace will come with us." Joseph looked at Grace. His fingers tightened around her wrist. "She will?" he asked, his voice small like a child's. Grace nodded quickly. Yes, I'm right here. Joseph studied her face like he was searching for lies. After a long moment, he nodded slowly. Okay, he whispered. David let out the breath he didn't know he was holding. With care, they helped Joseph into the SUV. Grace climbed in beside him, letting him hold her hand the whole way. David sat opposite them, watching his father like he might disappear if he blinked too long. The convoy moved. The dusty streets gave way to smoother roads. Grace stared out the window, stunned. Tall buildings rose around them. Clean streets. Bright billboards. Abuja looked like a different world from inside the SUV. Joseph leaned his head against her shoulder. She smells like home, he murmured. Grace's chest tightened. When they arrived at the mansion, Grace almost forgot to breathe. The gate alone was taller than her entire apartment. As it opened slowly, she saw wide green lawns, tall palm trees, and a white mansion glowing under the evening sun. This place didn't look real. Joseph lifted his head and stared. Something flickered in his eyes. I know this place, he whispered. David's heart skipped. Yes, sir. This is your home. They helped Joseph inside. The marble floor felt cold under Grace's feet. Everything smelled clean and expensive. But Joseph suddenly stopped walking. His face twisted again. No, he said sharply. This is not my house. Would Joseph's memory return, or would he reject the only home he ever had? David froze. Sir, please. Joseph shook his head. This place is too big. I don't belong here. His breathing quickened again. Grace quickly stepped in front of him. Joseph, she said softly, remember the blue chair you told me about? The one where you used to sit in the evenings? Joseph blinked. The blue chair, he repeated slowly. Grace nodded. Yes, you said it was beside a window. And you liked to drink tea there. Joseph's eyes softened. He looked around again, searching. Then his gaze landed on a familiar blue armchair near a large window. His lips trembled. That's it, he whispered. That's my chair. His body relaxed. David felt tears burn his eyes. They guided Joseph to the chair. He sat down heavily, exhausted. His eyes closed for a moment, then opened again. Clearer this time. He looked at David properly. My son, he said hoarsely. David dropped to his knees in front of him. He didn't care who was watching. I'm here, sir. Joseph cupped David's face with trembling hands. I'm sorry, he whispered. I always forget. David shook his head, tears falling freely. As long as you come back, sir. That's all that matters. Joseph's eyes moved to Grace. He stared at her, recognition flooding back fully now. You, he said, his voice thick. You fed me. Grace nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. Yes, sir. Joseph struggled to stand. David helped him. Then, to everyone's surprise, Joseph pulled Grace into a tight hug. Thank you, he cried openly. When everyone ignored me like I didn't exist, you saw me. Grace cried into his shoulder. That night, Grace stayed at the mansion. She slept in a guest room bigger than her entire apartment. But sleep didn't come easily. Her mind replayed everything. The SUVs. David. The promotion. Joseph's tears. By morning, she still felt like she might wake up and find it was all a dream. But it wasn't. David knocked on her door early. Get ready, he said. We're going to the restaurant. Grace's stomach twisted. Blue Palm Restaurant. The place where Susan ruled with sharp words and cruel looks. When they arrived, staff members froze. Whispers spread like fire. Is that Grace? Why is she with him? Isn't that the owner? Susan came out of the office. Her heels clicked loudly. Her eyes landed on Grace and narrowed. Before she could speak, David raised his voice. Everyone, he announced. This is Grace. He placed a hand lightly on Grace's shoulder. From today, he continued, she is the new manager of Blue Palm Restaurant. Gasps filled the air. Susan's face drained of color. What? She snapped. That's impossible. David turned to her slowly. Susan, he said coldly, you will now work under her. You are the assistant manager. Susan staggered back like someone had slapped her. Grace felt the weight of every eye in the room. David leaned toward Grace and whispered, be strong. Then he walked out. The moment he left, the room exploded with whispers. Susan stared at Grace with pure hatred. This won't last, Susan hissed. You think you've won? Grace swallowed, forcing herself to stand tall. I'm just here to do my job, she said calmly. But inside, fear churned. Days passed. Grace worked hard. She treated staff with respect. Customers noticed the change. But Susan watched her closely. Too closely. One afternoon, Grace noticed something strange. Her juice tasted bitter. She paused. Susan stood nearby watching. Grace's heart pounded. She remembered the last time something felt wrong. She quietly switched the glasses. Minutes later, Susan reached for the juice. Grace grabbed her wrist. "What did you put in it?" Grace asked sharply. Susan's face went pale. Staff gasped. Security was called. Susan broke down crying, denying everything. David arrived shortly after. When he heard what happened, his face hardened. But instead of firing Susan immediately, he gave her a warning. "Next time," he said coldly, "you won't be standing here." Susan nodded, defeated. From that day she changed. Not because she became kind, but because she became afraid. Grace slowly grew close to Joseph. They spent evenings talking in the garden. Joseph told stories of his childhood. Grace told him about her parents. Both police officers killed in an ambush. Joseph held her hand as she cried. "You are my daughter now," he said gently. Slowly, Grace and David also grew close. Quiet conversations turned into laughter. Laughter turned into something deeper. One evening, as they stood in the garden under soft lights, David looked at Grace differently. Like he saw her not as a miracle, but as home. He reached for her hand. Grace felt her heart race. But somewhere in the shadows, someone watched. Susan stood by a window, her eyes cold, her lips curled into a thin smile. What was Susan planning next? Grace began to understand something important about power. Power did not always shout. Sometimes it smiled. Susan smiled a lot now. Every morning she greeted Grace with a soft voice and forced politeness. She offered help. She asked questions. She even brought snacks to the office. At first, Grace felt relieved. Maybe Susan had finally accepted the truth. Maybe the fight was over. But something deep inside Grace refused to relax. Because Susan's eyes never smiled with her mouth. They watched. They calculated. And they waited. Business at Blue Palm Restaurant grew fast. Customers noticed the change. Food came out on time. Staff stopped arguing. The air felt lighter. Reviews online improved. David visited often. Always calm, always observant. And every time he came, Susan grew quieter. One afternoon, David called Grace into the private office. "You're doing well," he said. "Better than I expected." Grace smiled, shy but proud. "Thank you, sir." David looked at her seriously. "I want you to attend the Abuja Hospitality Manager dinner next week. Represent the restaurant." Grace's breath caught. That event was for top managers. Big names. Powerful people. "Me?" she asked. David nodded. "You earned it." Outside the office, Susan overheard everything. Her nails dug into her palms. That night, Grace returned to the mansion exhausted. Joseph sat in his blue chair by the window, humming softly. "Come," he said warmly. "Sit with me." Grace sat beside him. "You are glowing," Joseph said. "Like someone whose life is changing." Grace smiled weakly. "Sometimes I'm scared." Joseph nodded slowly. "Change is always loud inside the heart. But goodness is never wrong." Grace rested her head against his shoulder. She didn't notice David watching them from the doorway, his eyes soft. At the restaurant, Susan began her real plan. She started small. A missing receipt here. A wrong delivery there. Each time, Susan whispered just enough doubt into other staff members' ears. Strange things are happening since she became manager. She's young. Maybe she's overwhelmed. Grace noticed the tension but pushed forward. Then the audit notice arrived. An unplanned inspection. Grace's stomach dropped when she read it. An audit could destroy her if anything went wrong. Susan offered help immediately. "I'll organize the records," she said sweetly. "You've been so busy." Grace hesitated. But time was short. "Okay," Grace said. "Thank you." Susan smiled. The night before the audit, Grace couldn't sleep. She checked the records again and again. Everything looked fine. Still, fear pressed against her chest. At dawn, she prayed quietly. "Please," she whispered, "let truth stand." The auditors arrived sharp and serious. Files were reviewed. Questions were asked. Susan stood nearby. Calm. Too calm. Then one auditor frowned. "There's a missing transaction here," he said. Grace's heart skipped. She leaned forward. "That can't be right." The auditor turned the screen. A large amount. Unaccounted for. The room went silent. Susan gasped dramatically. "Oh my Grace. Did you forget to log it?" Grace stared at the screen, confused. "I've never seen that before." The auditors exchanged looks. "This is serious," one said. Grace's hand shook. This was it. This was how everything ended. Just then the office door opened. David walked in. "What's going on?" he asked calmly. The auditors explained. David listened carefully. Then he turned to Grace. "Did you authorize this transaction?" "No," Grace said firmly. "Never." David nodded once. Then he turned to Susan. "Who handled the records last night?" Susan opened her mouth. But before she could speak, a staff member burst in. "I'm sorry," the young man said nervously, "but I found this." He held up a flash drive. "I was cleaning the office. It fell from behind the cabinet. The auditors took it. They checked the contents." The room grew tense. Then one auditor looked up sharply. "This transaction was edited late last night," he said. "From this device." He turned the screen. Susan's name appeared. Susan's face drained of color. I was only trying to help," she stammered. David's voice was ice. "Leave," he said. "Now." Susan fell to her knees crying. Security escorted her out. Grace sank into her chair, shaking. David placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You passed the test," he said quietly. But as Susan was taken away, her eyes burned into Grace's memory. What would happen to Susan now, and was this truly the end of her schemes? That evening, David found Grace in the garden. "You could have lost everything today," he said softly. Grace nodded. "I know." "You didn't," he said, "because you stayed honest." Silence stretched between them. Then David took a deep breath. "There's something I need to tell you." Grace looked up. "My father insists you stay here permanently," David said. "He says this is your home now." Grace's eyes filled with tears. Before she could respond, David continued. "And I agree." Their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them. A feeling too big for words. David reached for her hand. Grace didn't pull away. But before either of them could speak, Joseph's voice rang out from the house. "David," he shouted, sharp with fear. They rushed inside. Joseph stood in the living room, pale and shaking. "It's happening again," he whispered. "I feel it." Grace's heart dropped. The doctor came quickly. After examining Joseph, he said the episode would pass. They kept familiar faces around him. Grace stayed by Joseph's side. She talked about the road where they met, the jollof rice and chicken, his smile after eating. Joseph listened. Sometimes his eyes were clear. Sometimes they were empty. But slowly he came back. Meanwhile, Susan's case went to court. The police found evidence of the poison attempt. She was sentenced and quietly disappeared from their lives. Grace never celebrated it. She simply moved on. News spread about Grace's story. A poor waitress who fed a homeless man and changed her life through kindness. She became a symbol of hope in Abuja. Months later, David knelt in the garden under soft lights. "Grace," he said, his voice unsteady, "my father says you saved his life. I say you saved mine too." Grace's heart pounded. David pulled out a small velvet box. "Will you marry me?" he asked. Tears streamed down Grace's face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Joseph stood at the balcony, clapping slowly, tears in his eyes. "My son," he said proudly, "you chose well." The wedding was beautiful. Joseph walked Grace down the aisle, dressed in a blue kaftan and red cap. "I am blessed," Joseph said, "to witness my son marry the woman who fed me when I had nothing." The hall wept. Years passed. Grace and David waited for a child. 4 years of prayers and tears. Then one night, a cry filled the delivery room. A baby girl was born. They named her Joy. As Joseph held the baby, his face glowed with happiness. But his hands trembled slightly. Grace saw it but said nothing. She knew his memory came and went, but his heart always stayed. More years passed. Joseph grew older. His steps became slower. His memory became weaker. But his smile stayed. Every evening he sat in his blue chair by the window. Joy often crawled toward him, laughing. "This child brings light," he would say. One evening Joseph called Grace to him. "Sit," he said. She sat beside him just like years ago. "Tell me again," he said quietly, "how we met." Grace smiled. She told him about the uncompleted building, the dusty ground, the jollof rice and chicken. Joseph listened with shining eyes. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "You gave me dignity when I had none," he said. "Promise me something." Grace swallowed. "Anything." "When I am gone," he said gently, "never stop being who you are." Grace shook her head. "You're not going anywhere." Joseph smiled sadly. "We all go somewhere." That night, Joseph passed peacefully in his sleep. There was no pain, no struggle. Just quiet. The mansion woke to silence. At the funeral, the hall was full. Rich men, poor men, people Joseph once helped. David stood strong, but his voice shook. My father once lived like a beggar, he said. Not because he was poor, but because he was lost. He turned and looked at Grace. He was found because one poor waitress chose kindness over comfort. Grace bowed her head. Life moved forward. Years passed. Joy grew into a kind, curious girl. One day, while walking with Grace in Abuja, Joy pointed to an old man sitting by the road. Mommy, she said. Is he hungry? Grace knelt and smiled. Yes, baby. Joy held out her snack. The old man smiled and took it. God bless you, my daughter, he said. Grace felt it then. The circle. The story. The truth. Kindness always comes back home. And somewhere beyond memory and time, Joseph smiled too. We've come to the end of today's story. I hope it touched your heart. Thanks for watching and staying with us till the end. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. See you in the next one. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from?